So that's our dodge and burn done. I'm now going to group them into one dodge and burn layer, and I'm going to then group the dodge and burn and the pixel work into a retouch group or an RT group. And that's where we've come so far. That means that the next set of tasks are all about local color corrections. So to get started on our local color corrections, I'm going to create a new group, which I'm going to call local CC. And then in this group, I'm going to create a group for the foreground. Put that in there. And I'm going to use the mask that we've got from our channel masks, the foreground mask, and apply that. And I'm also going to add a group for the background. I'm just going to get that foreground mask and I'm going to invert it and apply that as a background mask. And then in the foreground, I'm going to have a hair mask or hair group, sorry. Oh, put that in there. And I'm going to label that hair. And I'm also going to have a group for the skin. Let's just put that above that. And I'm just going to get the foreground group and I'm going to subtract the hair group from it to get the skin. And I'm going to label this skin. I know that because I've subtracted one mask from another, I'm just going to need to go in and burn that skin down. Oh, let's put this back to shadows, and the exposure can be quite high. And then we're just going to burn this down quickly to clean up the mask. Great. So that's our skin. And then in the skin, we've got the teeth, the tongue, and the lips, and we'll get to those when we do the adjustments in there. So I've got my basic layout here, and there are a couple of things I want to address. The first is the side of the face here. It just needs to be warmed up. So I'm going to go into the skin group and I'm going to get curve, and I'm just going to add some red to the curve, and I'm going to minus some green to make it more magenta, just a tiny bit, and maybe a little bit of blue can come out to make it a little bit more yellow. And then I'm going to Command I that to invert it. And I still want my dodge and burn settings on my brush because I don't want this to be too strongly applied. And I'm just going to fill this in just to make it look more natural. I might also darken it a bit. There you go. And something like that looks better. So we're going to call this cheek. And then the next thing that's bothering me most is the teeth. So I'm going to get the channel for the teeth, and we don't actually need to create a separate group for this. We can just add a layer mask, and I'm going to do that with a curve, and I'm just going to take a little bit of yellow out by adding some blue. And I actually also want to get a hue saturation layer here, and I'm going to clip it by pressing Command and Option to the teeth layer, and I'm going to go to the yellows, and I'm going to increase the yellows into the reds because there are some reddish yellows in the teeth there, and I'm going to desaturate that a bit. And I'm not brightening the teeth, I'm just removing the color from them so that they're whiter. I don't want to brighten them because they obviously look quite natural how they are, and I don't want to make them look fake, so I just want to remove a little bit of that color from them. So let's call this teeth. The other thing I've noticed is that the lips need a little bit of filling out here. The edge of the lip and the edge of the lipstick are in two different places. So what I'm going to do, if I'm correct, I think the lips mask, it was to the very outer edge there. That's great, so we can use that. And I'm just going to create another curve, and I'm just going to guess at what the colors need to be for this. If you want to, you can use the color sampler tool and the eyedropper tool with curves to create a sample point and then match, but I'm just going to try and guess in this what we need. And I think the first thing we need to do is take the green way down and take the blue way down, maybe to there, and maybe take the red down a little as well. I think the blue needs to come down more. And that's looking about right to me. I can adjust it if it's not. But I'm going to then get the lips mask, and I'm just going to get the paintbrush tool, and I'm going to set it back to my normal setting, which is everything on 100%. And I'm just going to paint this in. If I need to soften the edge more, I can do later, but I'm just going to have this as is for now. And I can see that's got a bit too much blue in it still, so I'm going to take some blue out. But that's a pretty good match, and I'm going to just fill in the upper lip as well, just to neaten up that lip edge. And it's a little bit dark, so I'm just going to lighten the overall slightly. And that's filled that out. I do want to soften that a bit, so I'm going to go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and about 3 pixels is just a more natural edge, so I'm going to do that. And I'm going to label this lips. The other thing I notice here is that the highlight of the lip is looking a bit yellow. So I'm going to get that highlight, and I'm going to just get a curve and add some blue to the white point till about there. I'm going to invert that, go to channels, select the lips, just to make sure that I don't go outside of the lip area, and I'm just gonna paint that in just to clean up that highlight a bit. Great. So I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to label this lip highlight. And I think I want to also just make the tongue slightly more pink, so I'm going to go grab my tongue mask, and I'm going to apply it to a curves there, and I'm going to just take some yellow out by adding some blue, maybe about that much, and then I want to add some red in as well. And that just looks like a healthier tongue to me, so I'm going to label that tongue. Then the other thing I noticed was that these eyelids here, they're just looking a bit dark and blue to me. So I'm going to get another curve, and I'm going to take some blue out. And I'm going to add some red in, and I'm going to just brighten quite a bit. And I'm going to Command I. I'm going to get my brush, and I'm going to take it down to a low flow, and I'm just going to brush that in a bit. I might need to adjust the colors slightly, but I'm going to just see what it looks like first once it's brushed in. That actually looks fine to me, and that looks better, so I'm going to label this eyelids. Great. And then I don't usually, especially on such a natural portrait, I wouldn't usually brighten the eyes, but I do think that would work quite well in this. So I'm just going to subtly brighten them just with a brightening curve. I'm just going to, with my flow rate still down on my brush, I'm just going to brighten them slightly. Let's see what that's done. I want a little bit more than that, so maybe I'm going to up the strength of this curve. And let's take a look at that. And that's brightened them nicely. I would usually darken the outer ring of the eye and brighten the inner ring, but the outer ring is actually quite dark anyway, so it doesn't need that. And I think that's all we need. So I'm going to call this eyes. Let's take a look at what other areas we wanted to address. I want to go into the hair group, and this highlight here is just catching my eye. So I want to remove that, as is this highlight here. So I'm going to quickly go into the hair group, and I'm going to just invert this and just create a normal darkening curve, and still with my brush set to a low flow, I'm going to go in and just darken this highlight here. And I can be really liberal with my brush strokes because we've got that mask. Let's just take a look. I think that's about right. There's also some areas in here that I want to brighten. Just they're looking a bit dark to me. So I'm going to get a brightening curve. Let's just invert that and just a normal brightening curve. And again, I'm just going to the very dark areas and add some detail. Just a little bit of detail. Let's take a look. Let's brighten that curve more. And again, just in here a bit. And just on this edge a bit. And that's just stopping them from looking so crunched, or from losing detail, should I say. And I'm just going to call this hair brighten. Great. And then to go back into the skin group, there's still a little bit more to do here. There's areas where the skin is a bit red and there's areas where the skin is a bit bright. So I'm going to go and I'm just going to create a darkening curve. And I've still got my brush set to low flow. So I'm just going to darken some of the brighter areas. Generally, you want your face to be the brightest area of an image. So if anything is looking like it's, competing with that, it's nice to just bring it down and even things out a bit. So I'm just going to call this darken. And obviously labeling all your layers just makes it really easy to find anything if you need to. And I'm just going to get those red areas. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my reds channel and a hue saturation layer. And I'm going to pull the hue all the way up. And because we're in the skin group, it's only affecting the skin. This just helps me to see where the effect is being placed. Then I'm going to go down to the bottom here. And I'm going to remove the yellows from my selection, or from the areas that I'm being affected, just by pulling this edge in here. And you can start to see where the areas of red are in the skin. And so I'm going to leave it about there. And I'm going to take the hue back. And I'm going to just make it a bit more of a yellow than a red by doing that. And I'm going to invert that. And I'm just going to paint it in. And I'm going to put my flow a little bit higher here because I've got that effect, that limiting effect, so it's not going to affect the image in areas that we didn't already limit with that hue saturation there. And I've just taken out some of the reds. Maybe we can take some out on the forehead as well. We obviously want to leave those cheeks nice and rosy. The ears can be a bit less red there. And maybe the chin as well. Great, so I'm just going to call this reds. And then lastly, there's some areas that are looking a little bit yellowy green to me. So I'm going to get a curve and I'm going to take out some green. And I'm going to add some red as well. And maybe take out some blue. Just a little bit of blue. We don't want to add too much more yellow, but I do want to get the balance of colors right. And I think that's looking good, so we're going to take that and invert it, and then I'm going to lower my flow rate down again. And this chin is looking a bit yellowy green to me, so I'm just going to brush, and we're in the skin group, so we don't have to worry about bleeding onto the background, and we can be quite broad with our brush strokes. And that's looking a bit better. I'm just going to do this area here as well, and some of the areas on the shoulders and the chest, and a little bit on the forehead as well. And then there was one other thing once we've labeled this yellow green. There was one other thing I did want to do here still, and that's just to soften the highlight of the forehead to match the strength of the highlight of the cheek. So I'm going to get another curve and I'm going to pull the white point down, and I'm going to add red, and I'll adjust this a bit, I'm sure, but I'm just going to put some color into those highlights. I'm going to try a little bit less blue than that, so something like that, and I'm going to invert that, and I'm just going to brush it in. Obviously, if it needs to be adjusted, we can do that. I might have pulled the white point down too far, which I can see I have. It's going a bit too grey, but for now I'm just going to brush it in where it needs to be, and then I'll adjust it afterwards. Great. So let me go back and just pull that up a bit. And that's just softened that slightly, just to match the highlight on the cheek. That's about everything for the skin group. It's just minor changes, but they make a big difference overall. And we need to label that one. Highlight forehead. Great. And then I'm going to go into the background group. I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to desaturate it slightly just to get rid of some of that color in there. So I'm going to pull that down to about 60%, which I think looks quite nice. So let's call that desat. And I think that makes quite a difference to the image. And then I'm just going to check on and off, see if there's anything else I can notice that I want to do. Anything that's catching my eye. And I think that's looking pretty good. I don't think we need to add a vignette or anything like that. I like the separation between the hair and the background, and I think we'll lose some of that if we add a vignette. I'm just going to now, as a last step, check that I like my overall color and that I don't want to change it. I might see what it looks like with just a touch less green in it. So just to about there. Maybe also just a touch less blue. To about there. And I think that's good as a finalized grade. I don't need the help check layers anymore, so I'm going to delete those. And I'm going to add these into a group, and I'm going to call it edit, as that's my final edit in there. And that's a natural beauty edit. As you can see, we've kept it very natural. We've kept the freckles, we've kept the skin texture. If you look on the neck there, you can see there's still some skin texture. If this was for a different sort of campaign, that would be dodged and burned a lot more, but I think for something like this, that's a good place to stop. It's often knowing when to stop that makes the big difference in beauty retouching.